Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening to my presentation today, which is entitled The Temporal Middle East. And in this presentation, I'm going to think about the place of temporality as an object of study in Middle East studies, particularly in studies of the Arabic-speaking Middle East in the Western Academy. So I will first talk about kind of take a very brief historical overview of main approaches to the study of temporality, and then I will talk about the place of media and communication studies within that, and kind of more contemporary questions, and then conclude with thinking about future directions and identifying certain gaps in the literature. This is not empirically based research. I'm thinking about it more as kind of an invitation to have a discussion on this, and more of a provocation to begin to maybe like historicize that place of temporality in Middle Eastern studies. So looking historically on Western-based scholarship on the Arab world, a lot of the a lot of the focus, a lot of the questions that were asked are very much mirror other post-colonial contexts and are influenced by post-colonial approaches. So thinking of collective memory as a form of resistance has been um, a main focus, particularly when thinking about Palestine and the Nakba and work on refugee cultures of remembrance. The question of the writing of history and its links to historiography, to collective memory, and the conception of modernity. A lot of kind of canonic work in this, particularly in relation to Egypt. This is related to the question of revolutions and social movements, which also has been a dominant concern in Middle Eastern studies for a very long time. The Nahda, which is the intellectual movement at the end of the 19th and early 20th century, um, which is, translated into awakening or renaissance, and scholars have argued, not only have historicized that area, that sorry that period in time, but also thought about its continuing legacy in Arab intellectual thought. Arab nationalism, the rise and fall of Arab nationalism, its relation to Islam and Islamism, has also been a huge concern for Western-based Arab academics, um, particularly in the 80s and 90s, and kind of the 90s and the 2000s. Also, a lot of work on thinking about um, Islamism as a form of awakening, perhaps. And more recently, there is a move to historicize leftist movements in the Middle East. Some of that some of that work by historians focuses on the mandate period and the kind of the immediate post-colonial period. But more recently, there's also a focus on leftist movements in the 60s onwards. And I think that more recent work is also interesting in its relation to more contemporary debates around the crisis of the left, what is sometimes referred to as such in the Arab world, the relation of the left to Western imperialism, to militant dictatorship in the Middle East. So the contemporary debates um, are often had in tandem with kind of more historical approaches. And of course, looming large in all of the scholarship is the concept of Orientalism, that continues to influence, to be very influential in studies of the Middle East, and some of its applications were particularly controversial. I'm thinking within the realm of sexuality studies and the work of Joseph Massaad, and that continues to generate debate. So to kind of make sense of this, of all this like historical outlook, I'm making the case that what I'm calling like this temporal double consciousness continues to kind of haunt Middle East studies, and thinking about recognizing the self and the place of the West in that recognition, in that idea of belonging, and kind of the discomfort of whether or how to incorporate the West or to decolonize in when thinking of temporality, whether kind of more historically or in the present, and some of that kind of manifestation of this phenomenon we can see in relation to the politics of naming. Now there is perhaps we can say a bit of anxiety over what to call the region. A lot of scholars expressing discomfort in using the word Arab, thinking about the kind of minority communities in or communities in general that don't identify as Arab in the Middle East and North Africa. Others also saying that the construct of the Middle East needs to be rethought because of obviously it's a colonial construct and going for different acronyms. But that debate is really based in the Western academy and is happening by Western-based academics, often mirroring other discourses that are happening in the Western academy, without really thinking about how people in the region identify or express themselves and what are their concerns. So also like here the kind of lag maybe between the Western academy and debates within the region is important to think about, and how to think about kind of imported discourses that are projected on the region. So that debate continues. Now, when it comes to media studies and kind of the more recent like history of media studies in relation to temporality, I will talk about different genres, but also I wanted to point to age and particularly youth as a trope that generates a lot of discourse and scholarship. And not only academically, but also through the United Nations development reports and NGO discourse as well. And some of that is is not kind of thought about critically. Just the category is kind of used extensively, maybe, or very broadly. But when we talk about different genres, cinema, like a lot of canonical work on cinema and its relation to history and modernity, particularly in Egypt. When it comes to TV, that we could also kind of maybe think historically how a lot of studies began with Egypt. But now we see much more about Syria and Turkey, and the TV series in particular when it comes to thinking about temporality and history has been important. Less so on TV programs and entertainment, and a lot of the work on TV programs, if we think more broadly, has been dominated by the question of Islamist media, and some of that has to do with funding. Now, when it comes to social media, I think we are all familiar with how that became important and generated debates around technological determinism, particularly in light of the Arab uprisings of 2011. So a lot of that work is focused on activism and like the relationship with government. In when it comes to news, I don't think there is actually a lot of work that a lot of cultural studies approaches to Arab news. So that remains a bit of a gap in the literature, I think. Um, so to think about future directions, I think there is a need to think about age as a critical category of inquiry, not only in media studies, but also even in history writing and anthropological work. That particularly when interviews with older people are used as evidence, and sometimes I think there's benefit to thinking about memory in relation to age critically. Historicizing cultures of memory and futurity. So maybe like this is what I'm trying to do as well in historic thinking, thinking of cultures of memory historically, and thinking of the idea of the future historically. And I think younger scholars of the Arab world are now like there's more interest in the idea of the future, securitization of the temporal, struggles over controlling notions of time, and conceptions of the past and the future is also like an area that could be expanded on. The local and the everyday, this remains kind of an important corrective. Obviously, there's a lot of very important work done at this level, including by participants in this conference, such as Marwan Kredi and Ziad Fahmy. But I think when we think of like the way the region is talked about, a lot of the time it still remains like that local sensibility remains maybe like absent or marginalized in a way. I'm thinking, for instance, when it comes to social media, how not only is the region invoked as a whole, but social media is talked about in this broad term without really thinking of the technological affordances of different platforms and how they have changed across time in the past decade and a bit more, and to think of cultures of use as well in particular localities in the region. So these are some thoughts about future directions and maybe gaps in the literature, and I hope this could be a start of a conversation to critically think of the place of temporality in Western-based, Middle East-focused scholarship. All right, thank you for listening.